Zhongshan was born into a wealthy family, but a prophecy changed his destiny by saying that the family's business would be ruined by his birth. The only solution was to send him to live a simple life. Since that day, John lived as a very skilled monk and began to practice martial arts determined to break the prophecy. The story begins in a temple consumed by fire. Elders and disciples try to extinguish it using everything they have access to. They prioritize getting people out of there. At that moment, the master merchant approaches and is paralyzed seeing the height of the fire. He desperately asks where his son John and also his wife are. A disciple addresses him as leader and tries to calm him, saying that everyone has been safely removed from the temple and no one was hurt. The man breathes a sigh of relief at this news. Suddenly, an explosion happens inside the temple and the men are thrown far away. The wood was scattered all over the area. The master merchant saw all his hard work being destroyed. The scene shifts to a shelter nearby, where a woman tries to calm her son, saying that everything will be fine and that his father will take care of everything. This boy is our protagonist, John Gyeon. He looks at his mother with tears in his eyes as she continues to say that everything will be fine. The next day arrives, and we can see that nothing is left of the temple. The merchant receives a skilled monk at his home, and they talk about the accident from the day before. This merchant is the protagonist's father, and his name is Jang Do-yum. In front of him, Monk Gyum says he came here to talk about something very important. He recalls having mentioned earlier that he has a small ability. Jang remembers this conversation. The monk is uncomfortable talking about a prophecy he saw. He says he doesn't have good news related to the child's fortune. Jang asks if he's talking about his son, John. The monk confirms it. The father worriedly asks if something bad is going to happen to him. Gyum responds, "Not exactly." Jang then asks if it's something bad related to the family business. Gyum takes a deep breath and the man shouts, asking him to be clearer. The monk says that it has nothing to do with John's life. The merchant feels a bit more relieved. The monk gets straight to the point and says that the child's weak luck is fading. Jang doesn't understand and asks what this means. The monk explains in detail that wealth will come in, but will be like pouring water into a broken jar. The hole in the jar is larger than the wealth coming in, so it is natural that the fortune dries up. The merchant is shocked and asks if John is the cause of the hole in the jar. He understands that if this is the case, his son is destined to ruin the family. The monk confirms his suspicion, saying definitively that his son will destroy the family. Jang starts to cry, saying that this child is the thing he has most awaited in life. The monk interrupts the merchant's lamentations and says that he has a solution. Hope arises in Zhang's eyes. The monk says that if he entrusts the child to a highly virtuous monk and teaches him to live a simple life, it is possible to at least partially block the hole in the jar. Jang asks if this is true and says that John is his precious only son, so he does not intend to let the boy become a monk and end the family line. The monk laughs at this response and says that he did not come here thinking of turning his son into a monk. The goal is only to shape his character, and after he turns 18, there will be no more problems. Zhang asks if he is telling the truth. The monk replies affirmatively and then jokes, saying it is quite ironic for a monk to advise against becoming a monk. The merchant also laughs and says that this makes him feel relieved. The monk clarifies that he knows a suitable place to entrust the child and can fetch him when the time comes. Jang responds that he is trusting him and thanks him. The monk says there is no need to thank him, as it is all due to his kindness and they will always help him. After the conversation, the two recite some sutras. Some days later, the monk returns to the palace. The protagonist is held by disciples and dragged to a carriage, but he refuses to leave. The mother cries desperately, saying that Jian is only 8 years old and it is not fair for him to grow up away from her. Zhang tries to convince his wife that it is the best for their son. Meanwhile, John continues trying to break free from the men. Zhang explains to his wife that there is no need to worry because Master John K. Mok personally agreed to take care of the boy. This makes the mother even more worried because Elder Mok does not have a good reputation. His temperament is enough to keep everyone away from him. The monk remains silent, listening to the conversation, and asks the wife to endure just for 10 years, after which he guarantees that John will return home. At that moment, John screams for his mother and begs. She asks him to help her, which makes the woman's decision even more difficult. He is dragged and holds on to the door of the carriage. The monk admires the child's strength. At this moment, Jong tells his son that if he does not do this, his family will be ruined. Moreover, they might be fatally punished by the heavens, so he asks his son to understand that the family's destiny is on his shoulders. Hearing this is not easy for a child. He simply accepts his fate and gets into the carriage with tearful eyes, but he despairs as he begins to leave the palace. Meanwhile, the monk thanks the family for their trust. The scene changes to a few hours later. Jean is left on a remote mountain. He wipes his tears while saying that he feels like an abandoned cat. Even after begging, nothing changed. He finally understands that he must accept reality. The boy notices a ladder beside him and sees a man at the top. John looks at the man and says that the reality now is that he will have to live with that old skinny monk for the next 10 years. A few minutes later, the two greet each other, and John sits while his master tends to the garden. The boy does not seem happy, remembering his father's words about his cursed fate and how it would ruin the family. John feels guilty and tells himself that he does not want his family to be harmed. His greatest fear is that divine punishment might fall upon his parents and they might be killed. Thinking about this, the boy says he will content himself with spending 10 years here with Monk Mok. He doesn't think it will be as bad as it seems. Meanwhile, the man continues to tend to his plants, ignoring the child. On the other hand, John is bored and says he needs to do something. He looks around and gets an idea. The protagonist quickly grabs a broom and starts sweeping the leaves off the ground. The monk asks why he is sweeping the leaves when they will accumulate again. John replies that he is doing it because he wants to. The man then responds that it won't work and there's no point in trying to impress him because he won't teach him martial arts. John thinks the bald man is crazy and immediately says he doesn't want to learn anything from him and is not trying to impress him either. The monk feels that John is just playing hard to get and says it's typical of a merchant's son. He then reiterates that he has no intention of teaching Shaolin martial arts. This insistence irritates John, and he says seriously that he did not come here to learn martial arts. The response annoys the man. He feels disrespected by the boy. Monk Mok doesn't like dealing with people, and because of this, he has lived alone on this mountain for 30 years. He refused to accept disciples, claiming it was a nuisance and that he didn't have enough skill to teach. This lasted many years until last week when he was summoned by a superior monk. The superior monk told him that loneliness becomes unbearable as you age, especially without anyone to talk to, and advised him to consider bringing that boy to live with him. Mok initially rejected the proposal, saying he didn't want to take care of any kid, but the monk said it was a request and a destiny given by Buddha. Thanks to these words, Mok agreed to take in the protagonist. He received information that John was the son of a famous merchant, so he believed this responsibility ended up on his shoulders because no monk wanted to deal with the boy. At this moment, Mok asks if the boy expects him to believe that he is not there to learn martial arts. The man then becomes serious and questions what he is doing in the mountains. In the end, it doesn't matter what he says because his parents expect him to leave there, having learned martial arts. After saying this, the monk turns and says he will teach some moves for him to return home. The protagonist gets angry and shouts that he is only there because they said he was cursed and had to spend 10 years with the superior monk. Mok is caught off guard. Jian adds that now he cannot go back home. The monk obviously doesn't believe it and thinks they lied to the boy. He assumes the miserable parents want to establish a connection between John and Shaolin, even if it means deceiving their own child. At this moment, Mok hears the boy sobbing and asks him to wipe his tears, then orders John to go to his room and change his clothes because his current attire is bothersome. The protagonist asks what the problem is. Mok responds that flashy clothes are obstacles in the mountains. The protagonist says that his mother chose these because they were simpler. The monk tells him to stop arguing and go change. Minutes later, at a table with leaves and some grains, John has already changed his clothes and asks if this is the food. Mok responds yes. In temples, the rule is to avoid using fire because foods touched by fire can make a person's temperament violent, and the monk wouldn't be able to maintain discipline if he got angry frequently. The protagonist looks at the food in disbelief, not believing he has to eat something raw. Moreover, the clothes are so rough that they are uncomfortable even when standing still. At that moment, Mok says it's time to eat. John asks why Mok gets angry so often if he eats this food every day. The monk responds that he hasn't felt angry today and asks where Jian got that idea. The protagonist quickly responds. He heard his curses towards him, which makes John believe that the monk is so angry that he is giving him this inedible food. Mock gets irritated because his meal is being called inedible. This is the first time someone has had the courage to treat him this way. The man believes that the protagonist is provoking him on purpose, but this thought leaves his head when he sees that the boy's eyes convey innocence. Mock then takes a deep breath, understanding that it's just curiosity. He explains that there is no need to use fire because the food tastes good even without cooking. Moreover, they can save firewood. Jian is still somewhat skeptical and thinks that the man just doesn't cook because he's too lazy to gather firewood. He then offers to gather some, adding that he'll only pick up wood that's on the ground so as not to harm any living thing in the temple. Mock can't control his anger after hearing these words and says that just because it's on the ground doesn't mean it's waste. Over time, the wood rots and enriches the soil, helping trees grow strong. John is shocked by this information and asks if picking up the wood means stealing food from the trees. The monk is surprised by the boy's ease in misinterpreting things. John says he won't go around picking up any firewood because his clothes might get ruined, and he plans to wear them for 10 years. Mock feels that the boy is complaining about the clothes he received and sometimes even jumps just thinking about it, but he takes a deep breath and asks John to eat. The boy obeys and asks if he can have more. The monk denies, saying that if he eats too much he will become lazy, and laziness is a spiritual sin. Night falls, and it seems the food didn't sit well with the boy. He ran to the forest and couldn't hold it in. The noise wakes the monk, and he realizes that Jian is throwing up everything. Mock says it is a result of never having eaten raw food before. A few days later, the protagonist lies completely disoriented. He says that 2 weeks have passed and he still can't control his physiological needs after eating that food. John wonders if he should look for some fruit in the mountain. Suddenly, the monk appears and asks if he has been wandering around in secret. The protagonist is startled by the sudden appearance. The man notices some injuries on his hand and says that he might end up tearing his clothes while wandering carelessly in the mountains. Additionally, his shoes are starting to wear out. John confesses that he went out because he was very hungry. Mock responds that he is only hungry because he keeps wandering around, but the protagonist believes it's because the portions are too small. The man disagrees, saying that people can live well eating. You just have to believe it's enough. John lowers his head and responds sadly, saying it's hard to live this way. Mock says it is easier to do good things and avoid sins that bring punishment. Difficulties are part of the path. He needs to adapt. The protagonist becomes increasingly sad when he realizes the man has no intention of helping him. Determined not to go hungry at this moment, the monk turns and starts to leave, saying he needs to do something and asks John not to leave. John remembers the bald man's words about standing still to avoid hunger and decides that from today, he will just sleep all day. Later that day, the monk finished his task and returned home, finding the boy sleeping awkwardly among the sheets. Mock shouts, asking why he is lounging like a spoiled child when the sun is shining outside. This shout is enough to wake John up, startled. He immediately defends himself, saying that Mock told him not to move unnecessarily, so he was trying to sleep. Mock takes a deep breath and says that laziness and not moving unnecessarily are two different things. Eating and sleeping all day makes him an animal wasting food. John didn't like this comparison. Mock turns irritated and leaves. The boy doesn't understand and wonders what he should do. A few minutes later, the monk prepares to meditate. The protagonist starts spying from inside the room, paying attention to every detail. He wonders if Mock is reciting sutras like the other monks. He then puts on his shoes and decides to approach on his own. He asks if Mock usually rings a wooden bell and reads a book aloud while reciting sutras. The man responds that there's no reason to make a lot of noise when you are deep in the mountains, so he reads with his eyes and rings the wooden bell with his heart, which is why it's so silent. John is surprised and admits he finds it strange when he doesn't hear any noise. The bald man asks if John thinks singing aloud for no reason will help reach enlightenment faster. John gets annoyed with how Mock speaks and mentally calls him a petty man. He believes the monk avoids making noise because he doesn't want to feel hungry. At this moment, Mock asks John to stop disturbing his meditation. John obeys and returns frustrated to the room. He feels that no matter what he says, he will always be scolded in the end. Suddenly, a light goes on in the boy's head, and he has an idea. The protagonist thinks that if he imitates everything the old man is doing, it might be better. Maybe he can pick up some tips and see how he moves so little and doesn't get hungry. The next day, the disciples wake up before dawn. They clean the entire temple and organize everything. At that moment, the monk gets up and instantly arranges all the blankets. John notices this and is shocked, thinking it's magic. Mock looks at him and says, if he woke up early, he shouldn't be lying down like a lazy person. After that, the man leaves and the protagonist quickly arranges his sheets. He tries to imitate the man but makes a mess, so he just leaves the sheets as best as he can and leaves. John starts to follow the monk, hiding behind trees to avoid being discovered. At that moment, he notices how Mock climbs the rocks, leaving him in awe. He wonders how the man floats so lightly. The technique used by Mock is called Shaolin, and the boy is determined to learn it, even if it means following the monk's steps secretly. At that moment, the man begins to meditate. The protagonist hides behind a tree and mimics the same process. Meanwhile, in other temples, monks and disciples are also going through the same process, waking up before dawn and beginning to meditate. A few hours pass, and the day has already brightened. John is still imitating the monk and complains about the delay. The boy deduces that the old man comes here every morning just to sleep. At that moment, John is betrayed by his own stomach, which makes a loud noise, revealing his location. Mock says he should at least be silent if he wants to follow him secretly. John responds that he can't help it because he is very hungry. The monk sighs, frustrated, saying that even meditating in peace is difficult. John notices something white coming out of the monk's mouth and directly to his nose and asks what it is. Mock calms himself, reminding himself that in the end, this kid is just a curious child, as all children are at his age. The man then wonders if he should explain all this to someone who isn't even his disciple. The protagonist's innocent eyes end up captivating the man, and he decides to explain a bit because it's not like this technique is a secret. Meanwhile, John is waiting for an answer. Mock says that the practice he is doing now is the secret internal energy method called Ying Jing, and what John saw that looked like smoke is called Qi. The protagonist is surprised, but Mock adds that Qi energy exists throughout the universe, and you can live a healthier life by absorbing it into your body. This information captures John's attention, and he says it is fascinating. That's why the old man never feels hungry. He's been secretly absorbing Qi energy the whole time. The monk explains that if you do this daily, you will be able to absorb it throughout your body and accumulate it, which then becomes what martial artists call internal energy. John gets excited hearing this and thinks to himself that it's much easier than eating all the time to avoid hunger. He decides that he must secretly learn how to absorb Qi like the monk does. At that moment, the monk signals him to stay by his side while he trains, but asks only that the boy doesn't interfere. John agrees and returns behind the tree. The man looks at him, doubting whether the boy has given up. He tells himself that he would surely teach John a higher technique if he asked something more, but it seems that he is satisfied. The monk then goes back to his training while the protagonist tries to learn by watching. A while later, as the sun begins to rise, the monk decides it's enough for today. He stands up and sees that John is still there. Mock is surprised to see that John has perfectly executed the lotus position, which is difficult even for novice monks. John has held it for 2 hours, which is impressive. Mock notices how focused the boy is. Minutes later, they walk back towards the house. John can barely walk and complains that his legs are hurting. He can't accept that the old man is completely intact after doing the same training. Moreover, it seems that the monk floats instead of walks. John wonders, scared, if the bald man might be a ghost. Suddenly, Mock interrupts his thoughts and tells him to walk faster. John obeys and continues to admire the way the man walks, with his arms still and lightness in his steps. The protagonist concludes that Mock moves like that to avoid feeling hungry. They finally arrive home and start eating. John thinks today was very good for gathering information. Before, he hadn't noticed much that the bald man never wastes movements in his daily actions. He uses the minimum energy possible, totally different from the servants John remembers seeing at his house. Suddenly, Mock scolds him for wasting time thinking instead of eating. John immediately focuses back on his meal. The monk observes, confused, that today John followed him from dawn and repeated all his movements as if mimicking his actions. After eating, they sit together at the monk's study table. John feels the atmosphere tense and wonders what the old man is thinking. At that moment, the monk says that the book John picked up is basically about teachings and duties for monks. It's difficult for an 8-year-old child to read alone. John agrees that the scripture is very difficult for him. The monk responds that there's no need for him to struggle because he isn't even a disciple of Buddha, so he has no obligation to learn. John responds that he understands. The monk admires that the boy always responds clearly and precisely. He thinks that maybe he should buy something age-appropriate for the kid, at least to make him feel more included. The monk shakes his head negatively and wonders why he would do this for the child. After all, one day the boy will get tired and give up reading. At that moment, John stands up and looks for another book on the shelf, still complaining that his legs are numb, but at least now he doesn't feel so hungry. Suddenly, he hears a noise outside the house and asks what the old man is doing. Mock is doing his daily exercises, and John mimics the movements. The man seems shocked, wondering if the kid intends to imitate him all day because he has nothing else to do. Mock decides to make it difficult to see how far John can go. John loses his balance a few times because the master's movements are slow and he falls on the first try. Mock smiles, satisfied. He expected the boy to fail because it's useless to just copy the training without any foundation. The man continues his movements while John remains on the ground. He says that John should study and practice properly before attempting such training. John stands up, irritated, and questions if the man didn't say it's not good to move unnecessarily to avoid hunger. Mock responds that this training is to keep the body healthy and helps in the circulation of energy. John complains that he can't keep up because the movements are too slow. The monk admires John's determination, but remains resolute in not teaching him martial arts and Shaolin. He explains that there is a reason to move slowly. It's about focusing the mind and observing the body. The slower you move, the more clearly you can see what's happening inside your body. John asks if it's really possible to see inside the body. Mock responds that yes, by taking a step you observe which muscles move, perceive how your arms move, and how you breathe. After getting used to it, it's easy to understand even down to the hair on your body. John doesn't see the importance of knowing this. Mock takes a deep breath and wonders if he'll have to draw it out anyway. The man decides to simplify and says that the human body is composed of hundreds of bones, thousands of blood vessels, muscles, and 8 extraordinary meridians that serve as a source of vital energy. All are connected. He touches his belly and says that's why he feels so hungry. The man realizes that John will always find an excuse to say he is hungry. He turns his back and says that the boy can eliminate unnecessary movements and concentrate more energy on the essential parts. At that moment, John is paralyzed. He remembers that his father always said to get the maximum effect with minimal effort. Things finally make sense in his head, and John understands that it cannot be a coincidence. He then tells the monk that he will try his best, which leaves the man completely surprised. He says that if the protagonist continues like this, he might even secretly teach him some martial arts moves before sending him away. The scene shifts to the main hall of the Shaolin Temple. The elder checks the notebook and says it's strange that there is less food compared to last year. Another man agrees with him and closes the storage door. He says he heard rumors about an increase in the number of pilgrims visiting this summer, but even so, the number of food donations received was few, and we'll see it in the next episode. Remember to subscribe and leave a like.